a man who lived in fear, a man we can call a coward, a man of little or no faith, but God. Until God intervened in his life and changed it forever. Are we looking for God to do that? Could I get a witness? We are looking for God to intervene in our lives. Oh yes, just as he did for Gideon. Let us quickly turn to Judges chapter 6. And we will see how the story unfolds with Gideon. Judges chapter 6 and verse 1. It says, "And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. And the Lord delivered them into the hands of Midian 7 years." You see, the story of Gideon is not solely about Gideon himself. It was the story of the Israelites as well. Because we can't separate them. The story wouldn't have its effect if we were to do that. Church, to choose to live a life in sin and disobedience against God would cause God's Spirit to leave us. This is what happened. We all know the story of Israel. You know the story. It all started with Abraham being selected by God, telling him to leave his home and going to a place that he will show him, a land that awaits him with milk and honey, and that he would make of him a great nation, because God, in his infinite wisdom, was securing a people who he could call his very own, a people he was carving for himself for special reasons. It so happened the lot fall, and Abraham, through his seeds, Abraham begot Isaac, and Isaac begot Jacob, who later became Israel. And we know Israel had sojourned into Egypt for a number of years. And while being there, they went through much horrors because of the Israelites suppressed them. But God had never forgotten them. God had left them for whatever reason God thought about, or would have gone through God's mind for whatever reason God had for those people, Israel. But when the time came, God intervened using his prophet Moses, going to Pharaoh to free his people. And so they were given their freedom and they left Egypt. And when they left Egypt, God promised them that if they were obedient, that they will eat the good of the land. The land that he was giving them, it was a land with house that they did not build, with vineyard that they had not planted. God was replacing a people with them. That is how privileged the Israelites had become. And so we fast forward all the way into the book of Judges, and here we are in chapter 6 of Judges, and it says, "And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of God." The children of Israel turned around with all God had done for them They sinned against their God. And so Israel became poor. I want you to stay with me in the book. Israel, we're going to jump down to verse 6. Israel became poor and was suffering. And Israel was greatly impoverished because of the Midianites. And the children of Israel, what they did? They cried unto the Lord. You see, oftentimes, when we get ourselves in trouble, we remember God, don't we? When we choose to live a life of disobedience to God and his precepts, we will have to satisfy our own way. And so, the children of Israel just didn't disobey God, but they replaced their God and they followed the nation around them, and they too started worshiping idols. And that is why God, for who he is a jealous God, and he will share his glory with no man. And God finds idol worshiping reprehensible. It is one of what we could call a grave sin, because what it does in essence is that we actually shut out God and tell God he isn't who he thinks he is. He ain't no God. And that idols are better than him. We remember the same Moses, when the children wanted their freedom out of Egypt and they were traveling, and Moses went up into Mount Sinai to get the ordinances of the Lord. And because Moses would have stayed too long in the minds of the people, they turned to Aaron and say, make us gods. Make us gods to go before us, because as to Moses, we don't know what become of him. No, you see, it's real funny, it's real difficult. But we are human beings. And we are supposed to be sensible, supposed to be, that is. We have sense. And we could decipher, we know good from bad, wrong from right. But there is something in us that will just cause us to go contrary against God. I don't know what it is. But you see, we must be mindful of an enemy that we have. An arch enemy of God that usually come down and help us to become disillusioned, disenchanted, not seeing the things that we ought to. And so the children of Israel would have cried out for this golden calf to be their God. How foolish. They had seen the 10 plagues of Egypt that Moses would have performed before their very eyes. And if they had forgotten the plagues of Egypt as they were leaving, they must have remembered how they crossed the other side. You see, because Pharaoh, who had released them, realized, boy, I made a mistake. I want them people back, because who going to build my cities? Who going to make my bricks? And who is going to do this and who is going to do that? Let's go back for them Israelites. We have need of them. And when the Israelites realized that Pharaoh's army was behind them, the sea was before them and mountain was on the other side, they gave up. They started running and crying out and bawling for help. And all that Moses said, stand and see the salvation of the Lord. And when Moses would have stretched out that rod over the sea, the Bible tells us that the Israelites crossed the sea on dry land. If they had forgotten everything else, they could not have forgotten that much. That had to stay with them. But you see, something that befalls us now, generation change. Young people come, and young people don't see or don't know about the things, the experience that were before them. And even if we tell them, when we do tell them, sometimes it sounds like fairy tale to some of them. And so they disbelieve. And the story doesn't have the effect and the impact. But God would have told them that you must tell it unto your children and to the children. And it must be told for generation. And that is something that we are lacking even now. We are afraid of telling our children who God is and how it is that they must become responsible to the God of our fathers. We said, oh, they're going to find God for themselves. We are forgetting that there is an enemy out there ready to delude them, to disguise himself, to deceive them, and to persuade them that there is no God, that there are better ways other than God. And so we fail. We miss a lot of opportunities we have. And so, in the Israelites disobeying God, they become idol worshippers as well. You know, nowadays, we don't have a molten calf that we put up on a stand, maybe at home, on a dresser, and we bow down and we go through all kind of chant and so. I don't think that's what we do. But we too are so guilty of idol worshipping. See them nice frock and pants and suit that's with us wear? We glorify self in it. And so that is a form of worshipping of idols. Some of us have our jobs, and because we have the job and it gave us status, we feel that we have arrived. And so it's all well and good. Or maybe it's the big house on the hill. And so, hey, it's all that I ever dreamed of. And so you have to spend time. No, you can't find God where God is anymore because you have to lounge out in the house. And so we find many different reasons and many different things that we idolize instead of giving God his due. But the Bible tells us that our God is a jealous God, and he will not share the spotlight. He would not share his glory with anyone. That's who God is. Verse 8 for me, please. You see, in the dealing. And we did say that the Israelites, realizing their position that they were in, and they cried out to God. You see, oftentimes, God is waiting on us to find ourselves, to recognize the things that we are lacking of, and that we are in need of him, rather than he forcing himself upon us. Because he's mighty, he's powerful, he could lift us up and he could drop us, and we will come to our senses when he trusts on our head, ain't it? But that's not the God he is. He's a patient God. Oh yes. He's a God that understands. And he's going to just, his timing is always perfect and right. He said, so that the Lord sent a prophet unto the children of Israel, which said unto them, thus saith the Lord God of Israel, I brought you up from Egypt and brought you forth out of the house of bondage. 9. And I delivered you out of the hands of the Egyptian and out of the hands of all that oppress you, and drave them out from before you, and gave you their lands. Mhm. And I say unto you, I am the Lord your God. Fear not the gods of the Amorites, in whose land ye dwell. But ye have not obeyed my voice. It was because of the disobedience of the Israelites that God has given them up in the hands of the Midianites. God wants them to be taught a lesson. God wants them to come to their senses and to realize that God must be worshipped, that God must be praised, that God must be honored with your life and with their living. And until then, God dealt with them. Our God allowed them to be dealt with harshly by the Midianites. And so now we see Gideon come into the picture. Mhm. Who is Gideon? Go to verse 12. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him and said unto him, the Lord is with thee, thou mighty man of valor. Who is Gideon? Gideon, in his own eyes, was a coward. The first time we see Gideon, the Bible tells us that Gideon was in the wine press, threshing wheat. Gideon, in other words, Gideon was in hiding, doing things that should have been done on the outdoors. Gideon was coming so I come do it because of the Midianites. The Midianites used to rob the Israelites of everything they had. And so in order for them to have something, they had to be hidden. And so Gideon was fearful of the Midianites. Gideon wasn't a rich man. Gideon was a poor man. He came from a poor and humble family. Gideon thought of himself of having nothing to offer. Mhm. Verse 13. And Gideon said unto him, O my Lord, if the Lord be with us, why then is all this befallen us? And where be all his miracles which our fathers told us, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites. Now, what am I trying to establish here? You see, how Gideon saw himself. Gideon, like I said, he was a poor person. Gideon believed that this thing that has befallen us was because God had forsaken them. The God whom he knew, the God whom they told him about, couldn't be the God who delivered his forefathers from Egypt. Gideon became a doubter. Gideon lacked the kind of faith that was necessary for him to be in God's stead. I'm saying to us tonight, church, where are we in the grand scheme of things? How do we see ourselves before the God of our salvation? Are we doubting God as well? Or are we living by faith? Do we realize, you see, in I think it was verse 12, when the angel spoke to Gideon, he tell him, God is with thee. Do we believe that God is with us? It is important for us to believe you, who could be against you? This is what Gideon was about to find out. If God is for you, who could be against you? But Gideon had his doubt. Gideon had his fears. Because for all his grandparents and foreparents had told him about who God is, how is it we are here in the land overrun by Midianites, and they were ruling over us, they were robbing us of anything and everything